All right, so over the last couple of days, the fascist Florida governor Ron DeSantis has been pulling a pretty grotesque political stunt where he has basically been using vulnerable migrants as political pawns and shipping them from Texas, which is again not the state that he's even from, and essentially kidnapping them and then shipping them off to liberal held cities like Martha's Vineyard, which is what we're going to be focusing on here today with this latest story. Now, there's so much to talk about in terms of why he's doing this, in terms of what the potential outcomes are going to be. But first, before we get into some of those details, I wanted to just outline here a little bit of a historical comparison that we could get for these types of strategies that have been used by conservatives and reactionaries and white supremacists throughout American history. So here is pointed out by the JFK Library. They say at one time during the 19th and 20th centuries, you had this situation where basically Southerners were trying to embarrass Northern liberals and humiliate black people, and the Southern White Citizens Councils, aided and abetted by the Ku Klux Klan, started their so-called reverse freedom rides, giving black people one-way tickets to northern cities with false promises of jobs, housing, and better lives. So these same strategies that current governors like Greg Abbott in Texas and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis are using right now are literally the same exact strategies that were deployed by white citizens councils back during the 20th century here in the United States. So it's nothing new, but at the same time, it's obviously still pretty gross shit that they're doing here. Now, another important historical point here that I think is important to note is why these people are even coming here in the first place, right? If you go and look at some of the testimonies from these people, number one, we have incredibly absurd and restrictive legal immigration avenues for these people. So if you don't provide them with a legal avenue to get into the country, and they are desperate in search of a better life, or they're fleeing violence, or they're fleeing poverty in their countries, or the disastrous effects of climate change that are starting to worsen, if you don't have those legal avenues open to them, then yes, of course they are going to be forced to come over with in an illegal capacity. And so that's number one, is you have to fix our legal immigration system and streamline that process so that it's easier for them to go through those avenues instead of the more dangerous avenues with human traffickers down from the Mexican border. But in addition to that, you also have to look at the history of the United States meddling in Latin America over the last number of centuries and decades, where basically we have been meddling in these countries. We have been toppling democratically elected governments. We have been installing and then arming and funding far-right fascist dictatorships that have worsened and deepened the poverty and the violence that a lot of these places are suffering from. We again have the ongoing worsening effects of climate change, which is forcing people from their homes. And you also have the continuation of the drug war, which has been led by the United States. And basically, because of this effort by the U.S. empire, you still have these problems with drug cartels. You still have problems with political instability and poverty and all of those other things that we were just talking about. So I think that that's kind of important to note that, a lot of these people are fleeing situations that have been directly caused by the United States meddling in their countries over the last number of decades. But just wanted to lay that out there before we get into the actual specifics of this most recent situation. So here from NPR, they say migrants on Martha's Vineyard flight say that they were told that they were going to Boston. So basically they lied to a lot of these migrants and promised them a whole bunch of things, falsely told them where they were going to end up going, and convinced them to get on a lot of these buses and planes to go be shipped off to these liberal cities. So they say that about 50 migrants arrived by plane in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, Wednesday on flights paid for by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis that originated in San Antonio, Texas. So again, these are not even migrants that are coming into Florida, right? They're not even from his own home state. So that's how obviously beyond what we already know about Ron DeSantis, that this is basically just a political stunt that he's doing here. He is kidnapping people from Texas, okay, a completely different state that's multiple states separated from Florida, and kidnapping them under false premises and promising them things that they had no intention of giving them, and then shipping them off all the way to Massachusetts. But they say that the migrants touched down at about 3:15 p.m. local time, and later Wednesday, a spokesperson for DeSantis sent a statement to NPR and other news outlets confirming that the migrants were transported by Florida under a state program that was funded by the legislature earlier this year. So if you happen to live in Florida, this is where your tax dollars are going, right? As he is slashing other social programs across the state, this is where your money is going. It is going to literally do human trafficking, which is also kind of ironic given how much of a focus that conservatives pretend tend to have on caring about human trafficking in the United States. They're just openly doing it themselves to own the libs here. But they say the statement reads in part, quote, "States like Massachusetts, New York, and California will better facilitate the care of these individuals who they have invited into our country by incentivizing illegal immigration." So not exactly sure what his argument is there specifically in terms of them incentivizing illegal immigration. I mean, some of these states do have what we call sanctuary cities, right? And at the end of the day, I honestly don't think that it's inaccurate to say that these states, Massachusetts, New York, and California, actually probably will facilitate better care for these individuals than Texas and other conservative-held border states will, certainly Florida as well. So, at the end of the day, we have already seen a surge of support within Martha's Vineyard that we're going to get to here in a second, of basically local residents and businesses coming out to give them resources and support. When they arrived, they had absolutely no warning that this was going to be taking place. They basically just were, ending up with these buses of migrants at their doorstep and just had to adjust to it on the fly. But, at the end of the day, I think this is somewhat of a good opportunity for a lot of these communities to basically just welcome these people in with open arms and give them resources, give them housing, give them job opportunities, and then prove that, these immigrants are just human beings looking for better lives for themselves and their families, and they're not just some scary apparition that's coming across the border to terrorize innocent Americans, which is basically how these conservatives want to portray the situation. But they say that a number of migrants told NPR that their flight originated in San Antonio and that they were being transported to Boston, not Martha's Vineyard. So they were, again, just straight up lying to these people about where their actual destination was going to be. And they say that the unannounced flight drew anger from Massachusetts officials. They got a quote here saying, "We have the governor of Florida hatching a secret plot to send immigrant families like cattle on an airplane," said State Representative Dylan Fernandez, who represents Martha's Vineyard. "Ship them, women and children, to a place they weren't told where they were going and never alerted local officials and people on the ground here that they were coming. It is an incredibly inhumane and depraved thing to do," and he's 100% correct on that. They continue saying that these migrants said a woman they identified as Perla approached them outside the shelter and lured them into a boarding plane, saying that they would be flown to Boston where they would get expedited work papers. They say that she provided them with food, and the migrants said that Perla was still trying to recruit more passengers just hours before the flight. So, I mean, this is the situation that we're dealing with here. I mean, literally going and trying to basically trick these people under false pretenses and false promises and saying, we're going to put you on a plane to Boston. Oh, psych, you're actually going to Martha's Vineyard. And also, promising them with expedited work papers, promising them with all these other resources and stuff that they had no intention of actually giving them themselves, but basically just had a plan to dump them within these communities and just let these communities handle it how they will. And now again, it seems like we've had a little bit of backfiring here in terms of this conservative approach, thinking that a lot of these communities were just going to reject these migrants and have the same sort of racist outlook and attitude towards them as a lot of these conservatives do. But as pointed out here by Julia Conley of Common Dreams, she says Martha's Vineyard responds with compassion after DeSantis dumps migrants in a cruel stunt. So what is she talking about here? She says, residents of the Massachusetts resort community of Martha's Vineyard on Wednesday immediately rallied to ensure dozens of South American migrants had clothing, shelter, and food after they arrived on the island without warning and without any idea where they had been taken, as part of Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis' program for the transportation of refugees and undocumented immigrants. And I do think that there is a fair question here in terms of whether or not this is actually even legal for them to do this without even warning the local governments in these areas and transporting undocumented immigrants across multiple state lines. I feel like there definitely has to be some sort of a human trafficking law against that, or state provisions that would bar that from being legal. But we'll see as lawsuits are inevitably going to be filed as a result of this. But again, they point out that they actually got a significant degree of support from these communities, saying that soon after the two planes brought the migrants to Martha's Vineyard Airport, local restaurants, schools, and community groups were among those joining the impromptu effort to provide care for the group. They say the migrants were given basic relief services at Martha's Vineyard Community Services in the town of Oak Bluffs, according to the Gazette, before being taken to Martha's Vineyard Regional High School, where they were given food and water as teachers and students offered to help with interpretation. And the group spent the night at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church. I also saw that they had some Hispanic language church service that was going on that they set up in an impromptu way as well. And they continue saying that a Venezuelan refugee identified as Lionel told the New York Times that he had never seen anything like the community effort in Martha's Vineyard, adding that he had been given new clothing by community members following his journey across Central America, Mexico, and the Rio Grande. He said, "It's been 3 months since I put on a new pair of pants." 3 months since he had a new pair of pants, he told the Times, or shoes. Okay, so I mean, these are the types of people, absolutely vulnerable people who are just desperately trying to come over here in search of a better life, or fleeing some of the violent situations or poverty-stricken situations that they were facing back home. And this is how these conservatives want to treat them. They want to pretend as if they are not human beings, pretend as if they don't deserve any respect whatsoever, and basically just treat them as cattle or as political pawns in their attempts to gain clout for the next presidential election that Ron DeSantis wants to throw his name in. So, I mean, it's completely disgusting, obviously, but at the same time, it does seem like there is a significant degree of backfiring here, where these communities didn't reject these people, and they actually came out and showed them a significant amount of support and solidarity. So, credit to the people who were actually on the ground helping to organize and do this type of shit. Definitely, this is a positive thing that they were given at least some resources. I'm sure that they're, probably going to be relatively strapped for resources, given the fact that they weren't even given prior notice that this was going to be taking place, but it seems like they are doing their best with what they got. Now I want to make another point here, because there seems to be this overarching narrative in terms of why Ron DeSantis is doing this, why Greg Abbott has been doing this as well. And that narrative is that, the Joe Biden administration is somehow soft on the border issue, okay? If anything, Joe Biden, you could give a fair critique from the left that he's been too harsh in terms of our border security, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. I mean, this is the same guy who has promised to fill border wall gaps in Arizona. Okay, he was literally continuing in the Trump effort to build the southern border wall. Okay, that's Joe Biden for you, right? And also go look at his Senate career, and you'll see perfectly clearly that this is not some sort of an open borders guy, which is how conservatives want to, cast him off as. But I mean, this is also the guy, Joe Biden, who is asking for more money for ICE than even Donald Trump did. I mean, you can see it here in the graphs as pointed out by Steven Semler here on his Substack. I mean, it goes from, Obama, then it ticks up under Trump, and it is at least, maintained pace, if not slightly increased from Trump's last year in terms of the amount of resources that he is trying to give to Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, an agency that, in my opinion, should be completely abolished. I don't think that it provides any valuable service for the American people, but that's just a tangential argument and point that we could get into at a different time. But, I mean, this is Joe Biden. He is aggressively supporting the so-called border security arguments that conservatives love to point out. This is also the same administration where you had the Vice President Kamala Harris, who literally got up on a podium and told Guatemala migrants directly to their faces, "Do not come to the United States." She said, "Do not come," right, in that famous clip. So, I mean, listen, if you are actually under the impression that this is some sort of an open borders administration, I don't know what the fuck to tell you. I mean, he has continued with a lot of the Trump border policies for much of his administration. There hasn't been any substantial, immigration reform policies that have even been able to be passed under his administration so far. I mean, all of the immigration reforms just completely collapsed. They were taken off the table. Joe Biden hasn't even been pretending to fight for immigration reform in this country. And the actual underlying reasons of why this type of a surge in people at the border is happening in the first place is because, again, number one, we have overly restrictive legal immigration policies that prevent them from coming through legal avenues, and so they are forced to go through illegal avenues, which are much more dangerous for themselves and their families. It's not as if they want to be making those dangerous trips just because they feel like it or because they want to come take advantage of Americans. And in addition to that, the argument here that we don't have enough space for them, or that we don't have enough jobs for more people to enter this country, it's completely fucking absurd. I mean, think about how many jobs that we still need to be filled in this country. Let's say you pass something like the Green New Deal. I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of jobs in this country that need to be filled in terms of bolstering our education system, our healthcare system, our infrastructure, in fighting climate change. So many different areas where we could find jobs for people and, easily be able to expand our population and be able to handle an influx in people. And in addition to that, you also have a lot of these conservatives, especially the, white nationalist propagandists like Tucker Carlson, who are constantly worrying about a declining natural birth rate within the domestic white population here. Now, obviously, he just wants there to be more white people people in this country. But if the problem is population decline or a slowing down of birth rates for domestic U.S., the domestic U.S. population, then one of the solutions to that would be let more migrants come into the fucking country. And there's no real negative arguments to be making in terms of not allowing more people to come into this country. I mean, these people have lower rates of criminality than U.S. born citizens. I mean, they have massive economic benefits to allowing more people to come in and immigrate to this country in terms of creating more jobs and expanding basically our entire market for the country. So there are tons of benefits that are added to inviting more people into this country. And on top of that, you also have to remember the historical perspective in terms of why a lot of these people are coming here in the first place, which is that a lot of them are fleeing countries where the United States empire has been meddling in for centuries or decades at the very least, has toppled democratically elected governments, has installed far-right fascist dictatorships, has basically been extracting the resources and exploiting the labor of a lot of these places, which is worsened the poverty in a lot of these countries and increased the violent crime rates in a lot of these countries as the United States continues to perpetuate the global and domestic war on drugs. And all of those things need to be taken into account, as well as the ongoing disastrous effects of climate change, which are always disproportionately going to negatively impact not just poor people within the United States domestically, but also poorer communities around the world. And this is a problem that is not going to be going away. So, I mean, so many different lessons that you could take away from this in terms of where we need to be going in a country with immigration reform, with tackling climate change, with stopping the exploitative practices with the IMF and a lot of these loans that we give to these countries, and actually trying to support and facilitate growth and cooperation and coordination between all of the United States and Central and South America to have a much more prosperous future for everybody involved. But instead, we just have Democrats who are basically using right-wing reactionary talking points. We have conservatives who are obviously also using those same talking points, and just continuing to push for this criminalization of immigration in this country, and continuing to pull bullshit, absolutely grotesque stunts like the one that Ron DeSantis did, using some of these vulnerable people instead of treating them as human beings, but instead treating them as political pawns for his future presidential ambitions.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying